Hello, this is Christina Jang from ITDP, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar today. First and foremost, I hope you, your family, and friends are safe and healthy, and this is in every sense of the word, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Thank you for choosing us to spend your time today and for engaging the ITDP community during these times. Before we begin, there are just a few things to note. To access materials after the session, please note both the recording and PowerPoint will be available online on our website. Lastly, to interact with our host today, you can use the Q&A function, which is at the top or the bottom of your screen. We please ask that you refrain from using the chat box, but to enter all the questions into the Q&A. So now we can go ahead and share our video screens for our speakers. And before I pass it over to Heather, I would just like to give a little bit of context of why we have today's session. Today, we will be discussing the future of urban mobility in North America's largest cities. Today's session departs from our normal format because we've decided that in light of COVID-19, we needed to have more in-depth conversations, especially with city leaders. So today, we are so excited to kick off these types of discussions with sustainable transport pioneers and trailblazers. So today we will have ITDP CEO Heather Thompson and joined by speakers Michael Replogle and Rodrigo Diaz. Today, Heather will lead us in a discussion around challenges in New York City and Mexico City and what we can learn from each other's successes and failures. Joining us, we have Michael Replogle, ITDP founder and current Deputy Commissioner for Policy at New York City DOT. And we also have Rodrigo Diaz, who is a former Director of Research and Development at ITDP Mexico and currently serves in the Secretariat of Mobility in Mexico City. So now I hand it off to you, Heather, and we look forward to the conversation.
All right, thank you, Christina, and welcome everybody. And thanks again, Christina. It's so nice to have all of us on video for, I think, the first time in an ITDP webinar, and to have you, Christina, on the screen, since you always do such a great job of gracefully organizing our webinars and leading us through. So great to have you with us visually. Good morning, good evening to everybody around the world. It's really an honor to take this time with Michael and Rodrigo today and to expose some of our community to this, what will hopefully be an inspiring and interesting conversation. I have to say, I find myself taking some especially deep breaths today, sitting here in the US. I'm in California, and my heart really just goes out to everybody in cities throughout the United States, addressing especially tough times. And I'm sure that will come up in the conversation today, but I just wanted to take a moment and recognize the real challenges, especially here in the United States at this very time, but certainly challenges that cities face all over the world all the time. But that on top of what is an especially challenging time with the pandemic and with COVID, cities are always looking to one another for inspiration and ideas and solutions, but I think more now than ever, cities are really looking to each other for inspiration. So again, it's really wonderful to have the two largest and leading cities in North America here with us today, Mexico City and New York City. You know, we look around the world and we're seeing so much change happening right now. We hear great announcements coming from cities across the world: Bogota, Berlin, Auckland, Oakland, Kampala, Addis Ababa. Some cities that you rarely even hear of are really taking bold moves to try and put new measures in place to make their cities much more friendly for people in this time of the pandemic, and really taking a space away from cars, which of course is the core mission of ITDP, making cities better for people and for the environment. We've seen historically that pandemics have shaped cities in many ways in the past, and this certainly should be an opportunity and a time for us to do so again. In the past, we've seen sewer systems and park systems built in reaction to pandemics, and hopefully this will be another time of great change and a pivotal moment for cities. So today, we're not going to talk so much about the challenges of addressing COVID in terms of the health reactions. There's been a lot of webinars covering those particular specifics. But what we really wanted to do is talk about this with an eye towards the future over the next 3, 6, 18, 24 months. What can cities really do to take advantage of the opportunities and to address the challenges? So again, we have two leading cities with us. New York City, of course, is one of the most iconic cities in the world, known for its subway system, its great parks, its great public systems, its great bike lane down Broadway with new opportunities for bicycles and pedestrians. Really so much inspiring to build on. And of course, Mexico City, another one of the great leading cities of North America, with one of the most sophisticated metro and bus rapid transit systems, plenty of space for walking and cycling, and a great art scene to boot. So really tons of inspiration coming from Mexico City. Again, I'm really happy to have two incredible leaders to inspire us. And ITDP alum, Michael, of course, the founder of ITDP in 1985, has spent decades inspiring us. We're so happy to have you here as our founder, and being with the city in Department of Transportation since 2016. So certainly years of experience now with New York City. And Rodrigo, again, another ITDP alum, in your position now with the Secretariat of Mobility, which in and of itself is a leading thing to actually have a Department of Mobility, not transportation, but mobility. And I think you've been in that role for about 1.5 years under the new mayor there in Mexico City. So really great to have your insights with us as well. So I just want to start with a real quick snapshot on the situation with the pandemic in both cities, and maybe provide a couple of highlights of the context in both cities, and then really want to turn it to you to add some color and to share your perspective. I had to get all my recent stats because, as we know, these things change so quickly these days. But both cities, about 9 million residents, 8.5 million in New York and 9 million in Mexico City. So far, New York City, as we know, is one of the areas that has had the most cases of COVID, with 204,000 cases and 16,000 deaths already. A real tragic situation. The first cases came in March. But the incidents ramped up extremely quickly. Within about a month, April 3rd, we had 10,000 cases a day. And luckily, they've now tapered out to be only about 1,000 cases. So we really hit the peak in April. Mexico City is probably about a month to a month and a half behind that kind of trajectory. The first case was actually earlier than in New York at the end of February, but it took a while for it to ramp up in Mexico City. So it wasn't until late April that the city had hit 1,000 cases. By the end of May, we're now in about 3,500 daily cases. So you're still really at the peak of cases. Both cities are talking about reopening. Obviously, there's a lot of economic pressure to do so. So cities are beginning to grapple with what that means. New York City has been, of course, hugely hit in terms of public transportation. Ridership was down to as low as only 10%. Of course, that's come with huge revenue losses and huge requirements for cleaning for public transportation. So that's been a real hardship for the city. Meanwhile, we have seen some leadership in the promise to have 100 miles of open streets through the city. I think there are 40 miles that were to be built by end of May. I think that has happened and more to come. I know there's still pressure on the city to open up more streets. And of course, now we have the huge challenges of the protests on the streets. For the first time in many, many years, we will have, last night was the first night for a curfew in the city of New York. So another additional stress on public space. Mexico City, to turn to some of the things that we're hearing there, certainly have had a lot of the same struggles with public transportation. I think your ridership levels never reached quite as low. I saw in the news about 50% ridership. but also incredible things coming out of Mexico City. We saw the paint being put down over the weekend on some new temporary bike lanes. I think it's about 54 kilometers that are planned so far, and I think there's more in the works. So good things, good opportunities, and good challenges. But let me turn it over to the two of you to maybe add a little bit more color. And to start with the first question of just what within all of that do you see as some of the biggest challenges and the biggest opportunities going forward? And Rodrigo, maybe I'll start with you to give us the perspective from Mexico City, please.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for the invitation. It's always great to be at ITDP again. ITDP was my last job before running the Mexico City government. Regarding the challenges, I think there are 2 or 3 big challenges. The first one is how to keep social distancing and public health of people in the streets, and especially people in the public transport system. And I think that translates to the second challenge. I think the biggest loser of this emergency is public transport, definitely. And probably it will take a while for public transport to recover the demand that it had a few months ago. It poses a big challenge because from the financial perspective, especially, in the case of Mexico City, we've experienced a historic low ridership of 25%. When your ridership is 25%, it means then that the income, the revenues of the public transport system are extremely low. So we need to think how to recover the public transport system, how to guarantee its sustainability in the near future, and how to adapt it to new challenges. We need to, I don't want to say rethink, but we need to adapt our transport system to new challenges. And I'm not speaking about this year, I'm speaking about next year, I'm speaking about 2022, in which probably we'll face something new, characterized by a low ridership, and we need to think about new ways of using and managing public space. I think public space will not be the same, at least in the near future. So I think that those are basically the main challenges that we are facing right now.
And what about some of the bigger opportunities that you see, just to maybe give a snapshot of that and we can dig in a bit more?
Well, the biggest opportunity definitely is travel demand management. It was a concept that we used to use a couple of years ago. Nobody understood how to use it. We all knew it was a good concept, but it was really hard to implement. However, we've seen that travel demand management is possible. One of our challenges has been to flatten the demand curve of public transport. We need to avoid agglomeration stations and trains and buses. And the best way to do that is by adjusting time schedules of industries or activities. For instance, construction sector came back to work this Monday, yesterday. And in the case of this sector, we established a new time for work. They work from 10 to 7 in order to avoid peak hours of mass transport system. Most of the construction workers use metro, use buses. They don't have cars. And in the case of Mexico City, the number of people who work in the construction sector is around 250,000. So it's a lot of people. Using these different times for opening activities gives us the possibility to manage demand. But there are also other options. For instance, this video conference. In my case, I think I'm a good example. I haven't been in my office in 2 months, in 70 days. And basically, I'm still working. I'm still having meetings. In fact, meetings are more punctual. That's something really weird in Mexico City. They always start on time. I don't waste time moving in the city. Of course, I prefer to have face-to-face conversations, definitely. But video conferences are not so bad. They're tiring, probably sometimes they're boring, but they're extremely efficient. And probably that's something I will keep in the near future. Probably I will adjust my time of travel, my travels. Probably I will travel less. We will have cities that will have a shorter number of trips, and probably that's good news for private trips made by car, for bicycle, as also for public transport. Accepting the financial side, which is extremely complicated.
Yeah. So a whole new opportunities around travel demand management. And Michael, as you look towards New York City, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities ahead?
Well, I think just as Rodrigo identified the major challenges, I think New York faces really a quite similar set. We face big fiscal challenges. We're anticipating a $9 billion shortfall in city tax revenue. This year, the state is expecting a $13 billion revenue shortfall. We've undertaken already $2.7 billion in budget cuts to the city budget, which have pared back the amount of resources that we have at the City Department of Transportation and at other agencies across the city, even while we have a lot more work to do to try and manage street space, which is the second big opportunity. I think we have to manage our street space, public space, curb space more effectively than we have in the past, because the demands for that will be growing more acute as the economy reopens. And we will, as in Mexico City, have a very large challenge restoring public trust in the use of public transportation during an era of social distancing. And some people will be more comfortable riding buses and subways, wearing a mask, not talking like they're doing in Tokyo today. Other people will not be comfortable with that and will be seeking individual means of transport, whether that's on a bicycle or in a car. And even a shift of 10% of the people who've been riding our subway into cars coming into Manhattan would create gridlock in our system. So I think we're exploring right now with a surface transportation advisory committee that the mayor has appointed, a number of different strategies that we could employ to help us manage the transportation system, to manage demand, to manage street space and curb space, and to help restore the economy while preventing gridlock. And so these will all be big challenges, and they're made even larger by the civil unrest that we've been experiencing in the wake of the tragic murder of the young man in Minneapolis a week ago, which has led to widespread protests across the country, including here in New York, and where we've seen a few violent side looting episodes that accompany widespread peaceful protests. And so I think, but this has made it very difficult for our police department. It made it very difficult to manage, again, street space and public space in a time of civil unrest, as people trying to exercise their free speech rights, and yet we need to protect civil order at the same time. So all of that's made it more challenging, I think, to work through all of the difficult governance questions around the COVID economic and transport recovery plan, because there are many things that have to be accounted for as we go forward. So many conversations are taking place as we move that forward, and we're all exploring this new world and looking at how we can take the best opportunities to move forward in a way that advances sustainable transportation, sustainable mobility, and a more equitable and just city.
That's great. Let's come back to maybe the idea of managing the street space and even some of the ideas around TDM, and maybe first just talk a little bit more about public transportation. I know this is, as you both mentioned, a longer term endeavor, certainly a huge financial challenge that's going to take some years to solve. But do you have some thoughts on things that we can do right now, maybe even things that you have done in terms of making the systems more efficient or bringing down costs? Or are there things that we can really be doing as we look towards the future with a focus on buses as well as metro?
Well, I think
Rodrigo, sure, please.
Yeah, I think there are two key concepts. The first one is flexibility. And the second one is redistribution, reallocation. I like this concept because I don't like when people say we need to rethink the city. No, we need to adapt it to changing scenarios. Now we have this crisis, but problem we don't know what's going to happen next year or subsequent years. So systems and streets and public spaces must be flexible. And we've discovered that public space and the way we live and the way we move in the city can be managed. I gave you the example of these new times for schedules for construction sector. I think, but there are also other ways to adapt the city. I think the temporary cycle lanes are a good example. Temporary sidewalks to cross the streets. I think it's a good time to try new experiments. All the ideas we had in mind for many years, it's the right time to test them, to analyze them. Probably some of those ideas will fail. Okay, but it's the best time to test them. That's why we yesterday we started our temporary bike lanes, and we are evaluating them day by day in order to correct some things, to make adjustments, and to see if it's possible or if it's a good idea to expand the system in other areas of the city. I think we are measuring. It's a good time to measure. Yeah. And also, I think the main challenge is for some transport systems that look pretty rigid. I'm thinking about, for instance, metro systems. Metro systems are not flexible. However, the infrastructure is not flexible, but the operation might be. One good example, for instance, we closed 20% of our stations, the metro system and the BRT system, the stations that had the lowest ridership. That measure gave us the opportunity to increase the operational speed. When we increase operational speed, we increase frequency, so we can have better use of trains and buses, our fleet. Our fleet is used in a more efficient way. So I think that's a good example of how to manage operation in a way that quickly responds to changing demand. Probably some ideas will remain in the future. And again, as I told you last week in a private conversation, I think this is the best time that cities have experienced to try new things.
The streets are open, nobody's there, the content for all the space aren't there, and we can take the space and try
There's
new
no
things.
congestion, no traffic jams, but
Yeah.
also there's the public opinion is willing to at least to believe in the government, to try new things. They understand why you are doing these things.
Mhm.
If I suggested to have a new cycle lane in Insurgentes, which is our biggest street, 6 months ago, probably I would have been fired because I was crazy. But now, having a cycle lane in Insurgentes sounds reasonable. Why don't we try? There's no traffic jam. We can try it. That's what we did, with no opposition. The neighborhoods, the neighbors, the store owners thought, okay, let's try. It's for the good of the city, and we will evaluate. That's why we call them temporary. We call them emergent. So probably if they work, we can keep the cycling in the future. But again, it's the good time to try new things, because their chances of having public support are bigger than ever.
Try new things. That's great. That's great. Maybe one additional follow-on question, Rodrigo. Insurgentes, the one of the streets with the new temporary emergency lanes. I think that's a good point on messaging with our communities. Emergency lanes, even if we want them to be permanent. But that's on Insurgentes, which is also line 1 of the bus rapid transit system, right? So is there, do you have in mind that the bus lane can actually take some pressure away from the BRT lane, from public transportation itself? Are you thinking of it in that way?
The bike lane was planned in order to manage demand of mass transit system. The BRT system has been working with 25% of demand. We can handle 35%, 40%, but when you reach 50, 60%, you are in problems. The stations and buses are crowded. That's what we need to avoid. And that's how we supported this idea of temporary or emergent cycle lanes. We also have a program of permanent cycle lanes. Last year, we implemented 88 kilometers, roughly 55 miles of cycle lanes in Mexico City. And this year, we are going for the same number. So, and all those bike lanes, most of them are in peripheral areas where the government never implemented cycling infrastructure. So it's necessary to balance, but also this weekend, when we started implementing this bike lane, proved that it's really easy to do that, and that it's really easy to change if they fail. I think the pop-up concept at a large scale is possible, and that's why we're also thinking in pop-up bus lanes. Why not? We can have a pop-up city, but a large scale. Something I never liked about pop-up concept is that they're always thinking in tiny interventions. Why don't we think this intervention at a metropolitan scale, many kilometers, many miles?
Yeah.
And also with complicated transport system. Why don't we think pop-up bus lanes that can improve efficiency of operation and increase operational speed and increase frequency? Why not?
Which is absolutely what we need. I have seen a few cities, I think, not too many, but a few, talking about pop-up lanes. I think Paris is one, a few others, but hopefully we'll see a lot more of that. Michael, I know that we have done some kind of pop-up lanes in the past to try BRT in New York City, and there's been some tests along 14th Street and other things going on. But can you maybe talk to public transportation and the challenges of public transportation and any ideas and solutions that you all are putting on the table?
Sure. Well, I mean, we have 200 to 400,000 workers that may be coming back to work starting next Monday when we go into our phase 1 reopening, which includes opening of curbside retail, construction, and manufacturing and warehouse operations. And we do, in fact, have some very good models already in place for tools that we can use to manage street space, to speed buses, to better allocate street space. On 14th Street, a year and a half ago, we implemented a busway with truck priority as well. Through traffic movements of non-buses, non-trucks are not permitted. But cars or taxis can come in and drop a passenger off or pick up, but then they have to make the very first turn off that street. And that led to an increase in the bus speeds on 14th Street across Manhattan of over 30%, with a corresponding increase in bus ridership in a quarter that already had very high bus ridership, and which parallels an underground subway line, which is undergoing some repairs on weekends and evenings. So we see those tools work. We have a select bus program that has increased average bus speeds by 20 to 30% in many corridors across the city, also increasing bus ridership. This is less than full bus rapid transit, but involves many of the same elements with reserved bus lanes in at least part of the right-of-way, off-board fare collection, reduction in the number of stops where possible, and with changes in branding as well to help give this more of an identity. So we hope to be using some of those tools in other corridors as we go into phase 2 and 3 and 4 of our economic reopening. We've identified a number of corridors where these tools could be put to work, and we're working through the political process of identifying where and how much those things make sense. We also are working closely with the MTA, which operates the bus and subway and train services in New York City, to try and coordinate our messaging and service levels. MTA controls the service levels. They're controlled in turn by the governor. We control the streets. We're under the mayor. And we need to work together to make a system that works seamlessly for the riders so that we can make transit as efficient as possible while social distancing.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. So much to think about. Can you maybe say a little bit more on what the city is doing on open streets? And is there a kind of connection on using the open streets to alleviate public transportation? Is that connection being made, or is it more for kind of open space value?
Yeah, we have a toolbox for street management with a variety of tools. Open streets is one of the models that we've used, often close to the periphery of parks, where we basically just put up barricades, very simple pop-up pedestrian and bicycle spaces that allow local traffic and truck entries for deliveries, but basically vehicles have to travel slowly, and it's a managed permeability street. And these have been very popular. We've rolled out about 40 miles of them. We're committed to having 100 by the end of the summer. We're complementing that with looking at how we can expand and renew our Street Seats program, which offers restaurants the opportunity to set up some tables and chairs outside of their space, sort of like parklets. This is something we've done for some years, and it's been very popular. We have a number of applicants for the program this year, and a potential to expand that. We also, are considering other options, and certainly having discussions about, are there places that we can respond to the restaurants many of which the restaurants are closed right now. by government order. But as we go into later phases of the economic reopening, restaurants will be reopening, but with diminished seating capacity if they have social distancing. And in order to operate economically, a restaurant has to be able to accommodate, 70% of its seating capacity at peak times, and many can only do that if they have some outdoor space. So we're looking at what options we might create to allow some of the outdoor seating to take place in the curb lane, or even in some places in a whole section of street that might be closed. So obviously there are a lot of trade-offs to be made, and we're looking at different models. And I think this is a place where New York is looking to learn from other cities. A lot of questions. Do we explore this as something that we look on a very narrow street by street basis, or is it something where we encourage a more informal self-organization at the street level, which enables you to take it to scale more quickly? But obviously there are trade-offs going either direction in terms of how quickly the opening happens. I think there are some health concerns. If the reopening happens too quickly, you could have the COVID virus spreading. If everybody decides, to simply go out and have a party again, then our point of this whole economic pause is thwarted. And so we have to be careful in balancing these things.
Well, if we turned all of the streets into alfresco dining, I don't think we would have a problem. So maybe that should be our ambition. There's plenty of space for everybody if all of the streets were for people, right?
Indeed, that is the argument for scale and for informality and fixing this where you see problems after you've set a set of guidelines. But I think, again, there's a political process that has to happen in order for that to be an effective approach.
Well, and it's a huge opportunity. At ITDP, as you both know, we've been looking at parking for quite a long while, and this kind of both parking is involved in both of these, right? If we are taking space away from parking and giving it to restaurants, that would be a huge coup. And New York City has a staggering amount of parking for the number of drivers, which is very few in the city. And Michael, maybe you could give us some stats on that, but also just to say Mexico City, I mean, you've done some incredible work to limit parking and really manage parking. So I wonder if there are some lessons from Mexico City that might be applied for New York and really thinking about going to scale on this. And seems like a definite opportunity to take parking away, though.
Well, the good thing is parking demand has decreased a lot. And I think parking demand right now is roughly 20-25% of compared to a normal week. So it means that you can use parking spaces, parking spots, at least for a while in different uses. That again, that's a good opportunity. Parking is just one opportunity that the city is offering us right now. I agree with Michael. It gives us the opportunity to think the street as a flexible space, which can be used in different ways throughout the day and through the week. I really like to announce some things, but we are still analyzing. Hopefully, I will have really good news in the near days, coming days. But that's what cities are thinking right now. And in many cities, sometimes the good examples come from cities that are now in our radar, but they give us good hints on what to do in these days. I've seen really good examples of cities, medium-sized cities, in which they have adapted the street to different uses in order to put some queues for banks, for instance. I think, again, it's an opportunity to think and to view the street as a different space, because we need to rethink or to think what's going to happen in the public space in the near future. I've seen these parks in New York with the circles in which people have to stay there. I mean, it's something like a dystopian, but it's the kind of public space probably we'll have in the next 1-2 years.
Yeah. And politically, Rodrigo, how are you able to move on these things so quickly? You said it seems like you have really strong trust with the public right now. Like, and can you maybe say more about the tools that you're using to make these things happen so quickly?
People understand that we are in an emergency. And when you have an emergency, you can do radical things. It's time to try new things. And people need to travel in a different way. Many people are afraid to use public transport. They cannot afford a car, they cannot afford a motorcycle. So the city has to offer new ways of moving, new ways of planning their trips, and new and attractive and safe ways to use the street. That's why temporary cycle lanes are attractive and are a good idea. That's why closing some streets, that's why expanding sidewalks are good ideas. We need to create a more friendly space in times when the city is not seen as a friendly place.
Yeah. Much more open, much more healthy. Well, it sounds like, Rodrigo, you have some exciting announcements coming up. We'll be looking for those.
So, political times are not the video conference times.
Of course, of course.
But well, at least we opened the Insurgente cycle lane.
Well, oh no, it's fantastic. Again, it was great to see the paint going down over the weekend for sure. And Michael, maybe to turn one last, and then we can wrap up. I'm sure there's lots of Q&A from the audience. Michael, I guess maybe to turn it to you one last time in thinking about open streets and the restaurant community. Are there ways that you are trying to communicate directly to the community, or political opportunities that you see? Any sort of tools or thoughts that you have on how to take things forward politically?
Well, I think, we are indeed working on a whole series of social messaging campaigns, which we see, developing, evolving as we move into later stages of the economic recovery. Right now, the main message is, stay at home, telework if you can. Wear a mask when you're out, socially distance, and as we move more into the later stages of recovery, I think we'll be encouraging people to, use a bicycle more, to, be safe in the use of public transport, and to respect other people in public spaces. But I think we also have to recognize that, there are, a lot of people who live in the outer boroughs, in the poorest neighborhoods of New York, who in many cases, even though car ownership may be low in those communities, there are many people who are car dependent, because those communities often are the ones that have the least high quality access to good quality mass transit. They're often, there are many people in the city of 10 million or almost 8.5 million who, commute an hour and a half each way to get to low wage jobs and have to use 2 or 3 buses or a combination of buses and subway to get to their job. And so those folks often don't have good choices. And, some of them are needing to use cars. So we have to create a balanced transportation strategy that enables everyone's transportation needs to be met. At the same time, as we see many people shifting towards individual means of transport and driving in the later stages of the recovery, I think we'll need to be attuned to how we can prevent gridlock. And we've had in past years a gridlock alert campaign that we've done around the 2 weeks of the UN General Assembly and around some of our busiest holiday travel times, encouraging people to find other means of coming into Manhattan and the Manhattan core. And, you know, letting people know that if you try and drive in, it's going to take you 3 times longer to go anywhere. And so I think we'll probably end up renewing some of that kind of messaging.
I guess one thing I'm hearing from both of you is this is a moment when people need city leadership. They need city creativity. They're trusting cities to do the right thing if they can do the right thing, and really a moment in time, but one that we need to communicate clearly and consistently with the public if we want this to go well. I want to leave you guys a minute to leave any wrap up comments that you might want to make, but we also just have 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we do turn it over to some time for Q&A. So maybe just quickly, your most positive vision for the future and one thing that you think that we can do, especially as ITDP and our civil society institutions, what's one thing that we can do to help realize that most positive vision of the future? Rodrigo, maybe I'll ask you first.
Good question. Think about flexibility, how to adapt, especially the most rigid elements of mobility, and thinking about public transport, how to give them flexibility, how to finance them in the near future, how to adapt other sectors. Freight, we haven't talked about freight, but freight has changed a lot in the last 2 months. And again, it's an opportunity. So more than resilient cities, we need to think about resilient mobility or flexible mobility, because things are changing. We need to think about short-term planning. Many people hate short-term planning, but that's what we need right now. And so we need to think and to spread and to share experiences about this. One really good thing about this crisis is that, for instance, I'm in a chat with the Secretary of Mobility of Bogota, Buenos Aires, some Brazilian cities, and we share experiences directly. Our travel demand management measures were inspired by Bogota, but because I have a chat with the Undersecretary of Mobility of Bogota, and he told me, hey, what we're doing this, we're setting this time scale. Okay, it might work. Yeah. We gave them some hints, suggestions on how to promote micromobility, especially shared public bike systems. So there has been an interaction, a really good interaction between cities, but in very informal spaces, in chats, in WhatsApp, instant call. Yeah. And I think that's a great opportunity to take advantage.
Well, and certainly something at ITDP we always try to do is exchange ideas, just as we're doing right now. So certainly we'll do more of that. And Michael, last vision from you and things that ITDP can do and our community can do.
Yeah, well, I think building on Rodrigo's ideas, I think this is a moment of crisis like this is a moment in which we can really embrace that our urban transport systems need to be learning systems, and we need to be pursuing action research in which we try things out, and when they don't work quite as we thought they might, we need to be able to modify them and make mid-course corrections. We also need to be establishing performance standards for what we expect from our transport system if we're to meet public welfare, health, and sustainability goals, and then using those standards and criteria and thresholds to help guide policy and action. And, you know, looking, for example, at what triggers might cause us to implement the next stage of travel demand management action strategies if congestion exceeds certain levels in certain places. and to have in place plans that we can make actionable so that they're not simply something that responds to, the quirkiness of local politics at every moment, but rather helps us enable our political system to be more responsive to public needs and to deliver for our communities, and to deliver especially on reducing inequality in our system, and to recognizing and honoring and respecting all citizens of our cities, regardless of their color, regardless of their income. And we need to really integrate that into all of our work on the mobility system.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. A great way to end. Well, not end, but maybe to move over to Q&A. I'm sure there's lots of questions from the audience, and Christina, we'll let you guide us through that, and then we'll close out at the very end. But thank you so much, both of you, for sharing such great ideas.
Great, thank you. So I'll go ahead and dive right in for us, and thank you to those who have entered questions throughout the presentation. So this first one here, I'm going to bundle together. Thank you to Yash, Tomas, Cristobal, Justin for entering these questions, which is really pointing to what do we do in these situations with fair revenue loss and still very high operating costs for public transit. So on one side, there is what should the responses from the transit agencies should be, and then more specifically, are they looking more towards public-private partnerships, or are there some other strategies that you'd like to recommend?
Michael?
Our city doesn't control our transit system, and which is controlled by the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which is under the control of the governor. And we are deeply sympathetic to the need for MTA to develop more revenues. Our state legislature last year passed congestion pricing as a tool to finance $15 billion in additional capital spending over the next 10-year capital program. And in March of this year, the legislature authorized that congestion pricing revenue to be used to help meet the operating budget deficit of the MTA. That alone will not be sufficient, and nor will congestion pricing be implemented as quickly as needed to meet that shortfall. But that needs to be one piece of the answer. I think, clearly there will need to be additional government revenues found to supplement public transport revenue shortfalls. And I'm hoping the federal government will step in with additional support. They've provided some, they need to provide more. There may well need to be additional taxes raised at the state level in order to help finance our transit system. We're not going to get through this and fix it quickly, but we cannot make this city operate economically, culturally, socially without a strong transit foundation and backbone.
Yeah, in the case of Mexico City, I think we share the same situation than most of the cities of the Global South, in which the public transport is operated basically by the private sector. And when I say private sector, I mean little transportation entrepreneurs, who don't have a high financial support. So in this case, we've been really sympathetic, taking Michael's word, providing some vouchers for fuel, for purchasing fuel, but this is only for the short term. We still need to think in the midterm, in which we cannot probably there won't be political scope or political will to increase fares, and we will need to find some ways to find new sources of revenue, new sources of financing, because but that's something we'll need to discuss in the next semester. Now we are just dealing with the emergency, and we'll figure out what to do. I still don't have an answer. I'm really sorry to say that. I know the problem.
Yeah.
We are still discussing the answer.
I think this is the toughest one, right? Most immediately, we need to do all that we can to take the pressure off the public transportation system by providing alternatives. But the longer run question is certainly going to be, we need more government support and revenue, and we're certainly going to have to rethink public-private partnerships to be a lot more efficient in the future, I think.
Great, thank you all for addressing that question. The next one here, I'm going to point to Rodrigo and Heather. If you have any comments, please feel free to chime in as well. We have Rafael from Honduras commenting on the large paratransit sector and form of transit that those operators provide. So do you have any recommendations on how to make those types of travel safe, and what are the experiences in Mexico City? And for Heather, if you have comments on learnings from the cities that we work in as well, please feel free to share.
That's a really good question. Paratransit is extremely important in most of the developing cities. And since it's not regulated, usually we don't have registers, we don't know the number, how they operate, where they are. It's really hard. In our case, for instance, paratransit is prohibited. The law, Mexican, is not only not recognized, it's prohibited, explicitly prohibited. However, it exists. We say that it's tolerated. And what we do is basically to approach the leaders and say, please, follow these recommendations of social distancing, follow these recommendations, which are basically the same recommendations that we give to the taxi drivers, to Uber drivers, etc. Basically, the recommendations are the same. And thankfully, these paratransit operators have followed the rules, because the users are requesting to follow the rules. People need hand sanitizer, people want social distance with the driver. So if you don't provide that, people won't take your motor taxi or whatever.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I think this is a super challenging area. As we know, it is the predominant form of transportation around the world. And we've seen cities try to put measures in place. And it's been temporary in a lot of instances, and then has sort of fallen apart because it's just such a necessary form of transportation. There's not enough of it. People are dependent upon it. And so it's been difficult. I think we have seen some cities where the paratransit has been rationalized and modernized to be smaller, better managed fleets. They've had a better job of putting in some of these measures because their financial model is more sound. So you have fewer operators, more organized in a fewer set of cooperatives that have more support from the government. And with that support, again, they've been able to do a bit of a better job. But again, I think it is challenging. It is, I think, an opportunity to look at the paratransit industry, though, and try to get more organized so that they can have more government support in times like these.
Great, thank you. I am so sorry, but we are all out of time. We have about 1 minute left, so I will leave it to you, Heather, for closing remarks. But just would like to thank our speakers again. Rodrigo speaking about the power of pop-ups and let's be flexible. And Michael for pointing to how our transport systems need to be learning systems and have those performance standards that we can actually have the measurements to see where we are failing and where we can improve. So I hand it off to you, Heather.
Thank you, Christina. Thanks for closing us out there. Well, another big thanks to you, Michael, Rodrigo, for taking the time out of your busy schedules when you are dealing with so much on a regular basis to spend time with us and to talk about some really tough things and to be so frank with us about the challenges and also the opportunities, as always, to leave us with some inspiring ideas, the power of pop-up and making transportation more flexible. And Michael, as you know, we've certainly done standards before. So working on performance standards to make sure we use all of this and hold cities accountable to use funding in the best way they can also, I think is certainly something ITDP can think about. We will continue to look towards New York City and Mexico City for inspiration from the two of you and cities all over the world. I mean, here we're looking at two of the most populated cities in the world, but Rodrigo, you brought up a great example. We are seeing amazing inspiration and leadership from around the world. And at ITDP, we want to shine a light on some of those practices too. So hopefully we'll come forward with a couple of other webinars where the less seen examples and bring those forward too. But thanks again to both of you for being part of the ITDP network, for being such leaders in such great cities, and again, for spending time with us. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. I hope you had some inspiration, enjoyed the hour with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. And thanks again, Christina, for organizing us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
All right, be safe.
Thanks to ITDP for all its good work. Yeah.
Be safe, everybody.
Great. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.